welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Ball. My co-host, Justin Baker, standing by to break down all the rest of the signings. This is part 2 of our free agent day signings and trades, and we're just going to kind of keep going from where we left off. I think we just kind of stopped talking about the Detroit Red Wings and a lot of their moves, and so we're just going to kind of keep chugging through the signings, focus on a few teams as we go along. But Justin, happy July 15th.
Yeah, good morning.
Yeah,
Saturday.
halfway through July already. It's pretty crazy. I think this is the wedding weekend of the summer, July 15th.
I know July's a big month. I'll give you that.
It is a big month. You just celebrated your anniversary. I forget what. I mean, I was in your wedding, but I forget exactly what day it was. What day was your wedding?
June 18th.
Oh, it's June 18th. Okay. All right. See,
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, oh, we're close to the number. I knew that. But, oh, it's June. That's right.
No, but I appreciate that.
That's
though.
right. Your anniversary was not hot as balls as a lot of these. I can't imagine like being in was it like Florida or Arizona? I mean, there's some places in Arizona I think that are like 130 degrees today expected. That's got to be a bad omen if you're getting married on a 130 degree day.
Dude, no. My cousin's wedding, I'm sure I probably told you this, but he got married in Florida near, it was Destin. So,
Is this when you broke your ankle?
Yes, when I broke my ankle, right? He made us go to Men's Warehouse, get long sleeve shirts, these thick wool pants for his wedding outfits. Dude was getting married. It was close to 100 degrees out, like 100% humidity, and we're just all sweating. Not to mention that I'm trying to like manage on being on crutches and chugging through the sand. I don't know how people manage to do that, but yeah, I think at one point they even tried to say like, "Hey, let's put frisbees under the crutches and we'll just slide you across." I'm like, no, that's a terrible idea. It was disaster.
Nobody was like, "Hey, can we get like a golf cart?"
Dude, I didn't even think about that.
Something.
That would have been so much better.
A four-wheeler.
Yeah, because we legit had to, like, the resort where the reception was. We had to walk across the street, walk down a bunch of stairs to get to the beach, and it was just such a trek. By the time I got there, I was just pouring sweat already.
It was like, all right, hey, we got a guy in the wedding now that's on crutches. Can we make this any more difficult for him? Right. He deserves it.
Dude, I think my cousin literally planned that just to get back at me for years of torment I gave him when he was younger.
Nice. Was that awesome?
So kudos to him. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Good memory.
That's right. There we go. Let's talk a little bit about trying to figure out where exactly to start off. But I think the Nashville conversation is a good one to have because they buy out Matt Duchene. That leads to, of course, him signing with Dallas. But I wanted to get your thoughts on what you feel like Barry Trotz is doing here, because I mean, obviously the Matt Duchene buyout was pretty significant, and he's still a decent player. It's not as if he had 56 points last year. He had 22 goals, and obviously he had a pretty big cap hit. There's no doubt about that at $8 million. But they buy him out. He gets basically his cap hit becomes 2.5 this year, 5.5 next, 6.5 the year after that, and then for 3 years it's 1.5 forever. Talk to me about why you think they ended up making this decision. I know it kind of leads to Ryan O'Reilly signing there, which is, in my opinion, I don't know that, at least as far as a regular season goes, I don't know that Ryan O'Reilly gives you any more than what Duchene gives you from an offensive standpoint or from like a pushing the needle standpoint. In fact, I think he's probably less effective. So, essentially you're taking his cap hit and turning it into Ryan O'Reilly's cap hit and actually adding on a little bit more the next 2 years. I'm just kind of wondering why they chose now to do this.
Yeah, I guess when you really think about it, right, I think they're not necessarily hitting the reset button, but I think they're trying to – I think they were just trying to come up with ways to create some cap space, right, and maybe not necessarily create some cap space for this season, but, just moving forward, right, maybe try to open up a little bit more space. I do know Duchesne's, had a modified no trade clause that kicked in. I think it was a 7-team trade list, which, I get it. That kicks in next season. And so maybe that factored in a little bit. But being only a 7-team no trade list, like you could probably find a few suitors. I'm sure he would.
I.e., that means he can't go to Canadian teams. That's literally what that is.
Well, yeah. I mean, I figured he'd probably put teams like Arizona on there. Like you mentioned, a bunch of Canadian teams and pretty much anybody else at the bottom of the barrel. But
is that that's a 7-team no trade list? So that's only 17. He can get traded to 25 teams.
Right.
That's not a problem.
Right. Exactly. That's the thing. So, like, if your mindset is like, oh, I don't think we could move him, so let's buy him out now so that we can get some flexibility there. To me, that doesn't work, right? And so now you go out. And from what I understand, Barry Trotz is trying to change the culture in there, and that was his whole memento. Like, we need to change the locker room, right? And I get it. Sometimes you need different voices. You need just new personnel in there. But to pretty much just jettison your top 2 centers, that was
for nothing.
Essentially for nothing, right? I mean, kudos to Colorado for making that deal, because now I think they have themselves a legit. And at $4 million, Ryan Johansson is a decent number 2 center. So no complaints there.
Well, I'd say that he's and maybe even more so. He's a third-line center, and Colorado looks to add again.
Yeah,
at the deadline, they look to add.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. But to me, I mean, again, you talk about Ryan O'Reilly. They bring him in. They bring in Gustav Nyquist, right? They bring in these veteran guys, which is great. But certainly, when you think about the 2 guys you lost, you bring in those 2 guys. You're not pushing the needle any. You're not saying, okay, cool, we're going to be a better team this year. I just don't see it. I mean, I don't know. Once they bring in Andrew Burnett, I'm not sure if maybe he had some say in this, right? Like, hey, these are guys that I can't work with. I just don't really see them fitting in my scheme, my system. I just don't think they work. These are the type of guys I need. I mean, what's funny to me, you look at Nashville's cap hits, their highest paid forward is Ryan O'Reilly at $4.5 million. So
yeah,
it's all about the defense.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, even the defense, I mean, after Roman Josi, it starts to get Dante Frabo's solid, but I mean, this team is like, hey, we got Roman Josi, UC Saros, and we're going to see what we can do from a forward perspective. I just don't know how they're going to score goals.
I mean, it's going to be all Philip Forsberg, right? I mean, I know, I know he's pretty much the line driver there. He's going to be the guy, similar to like Kaprizov in Minnesota. I mean, he's going to be your go-to goal scorer. And I'm not sure if, Gustav Nyquist, I know he can still pass the puck, which is great. But, can guys like Ryan O'Reilly keep up with him and, keep their legs moving long enough to help him out? We'll see how that works out. This year they have almost $9 million in dead cap space. They've got 2.5 to Duchesne, $2 million to Turris for another 5 years. Ryan Johansson, they're eating half his salary, and then Ekholm, of course, $250K for the next 3 years. So, but next year, when that Duchesne cap hit jumps to 5.5, I mean, they're going to be at almost $12 million in just dead cap space. Man,
it's confusing because when you look at it and you go, a Ryan O'Reilly signing sort of just says like, hey, we're trying to win. But you look at the rest of the team, you look at the way they're constructed, and you look at the cap hell that they're in and that they've put themselves in. Why? It's just I'm questioning some of these moves. I know they have a lot of UFAs at the end of this year from the forward position, like you said. I don't see a direction yet, and that could just be that they're not done. And this is a process, but I don't love what's happening so far. I think I would have just preferred to see Duchesne stay for another year. You bring in Ryan O'Reilly, and I think you'd still have about the same amount of cap space. I think maybe not this year exactly. Yeah, I mean they'd be able to do it if they had. It'd be $8 million. But yeah, they would have the cap space to have kept Duchesne this year, and it wouldn't have been a problem. Like, why not just keep him for one more year? You could buy him out at the end of next year, and then it's not as crazy of a buyout. But I feel like bring in Ryan O'Reilly and see if he can help to change the culture with Duchesne, rather than jettisoning a pretty productive center.
Yeah, and the other thing is, too, you have to imagine if they're hitting a reset button here. I mean, I don't know internally what they're thinking, but if they end up falling off if the wheels fall off, right, and they end up, at the bottom of the standings in this division, which is more than possible, maybe outside of Chicago. But, I mean, look, UC Saros has only got 2 years left on his deal. I mean, once he's gone, then it's really going to be a reset, because if you don't have a goaltender, and gosh, then your best defensemen are going to be, a 35-year-old Roman Josi, a 36-year-old Ryan McDonough.
Yeah. Yes, a lot of their players are like, they're on the wrong side of the age trends. So eventually they are going to start taking steps backwards, and I don't see where this team's going. I think that buyout was very strange. Other than, hey, we want to shake things up. And I get that. But, I mean, you just lost a player who put up 22 goals and 56 points. And in the year before had basically a career year. Who's to say he couldn't do that again? And
right. Andrew Brunette brought out the best. And we saw like Jonathan Huberdeau. I mean, he did that with these guys. And maybe he could have done the same with Duchesne, another 80-point season.
And, if it's fine. If it was like, oh, Nashville's trying to lose, then fine. The move makes sense. And in that case, I guess you're trying to get rid of Josi. But I think you're looking at this and going, they know they have Josi and Saros, and they're going to try and see what they can do with those guys. But the rest of it, why? A lot of whys for me. Don't like what they're doing so far. And hopefully Barry Trotz can kind of right this ship, and we'll check in later, and they'll be in a better spot. I mean, they do have a lot of draft picks for next year, so there's that. But I would like to see Nashville commit one way or another and figure out what this team's doing. I mean, they don't have a real number one center. Ryan O'Reilly, let's be honest, like, he had a nice little run with the Leafs. He was in a very protected place because of all the talent that was around him. But in St. Louis, I mean, in 40 games, he had 19 points. I mean, he was a 40-point guy, which, I mean, again, they signed him to that number, 4.5. That's about right. But for another 4 years, for the way that he plays, that deal's going to take him to 36. It's just, and in 4 years, what's going to be happening in Nashville? I guess you figure you can trade him, but I don't know. Just seems strange all around. Like, why is Ryan O'Reilly, who supposedly is this guy who like just desperately wants to win, why is he going here to try and win? This is not a team on the cusp of winning a cup.
Right. And you think if money's not the factor here for him, right? Maybe, I don't know, maybe money in term was his driving force.
Maybe it was a factor.
If it really is, right. But I mean, if it really was the Stanley Cup, you could have taken 3.5, 3.8 or something like that, and gone to a team that is closer to winning. Like, for example, Dallas, who just signed Matt Duchesne. I
mean, or you're telling me that Toronto wouldn't have signed him for $3.8 million? I mean, maybe not for 4 years. Maybe that's where his sticking point. He wanted the extra year, or maybe an extra 2 years on top of what somebody was willing to give him. But anyways, we'll move on from Nashville. We'll wait and see if Barry Trotz can impress me a little more moving forward. I know that he is pretty concerned about that. He did call me last night, told me, "Hey, Mark, I'm really sorry." Sorry about that, buddy. I have a plan, but I can't tell you what it is, because then everyone will try to screw me over. So we're just waiting. Well, let's shift over to Dallas, who signs Matt Duchesne. Jim Nill just doing some under the radar kinds of things that I really appreciated. Sam Steele signing basically almost a league minimum contract there too, who had a decent season for Minnesota, got 10 goals, career high in goals and assists, and now is going to go to Dallas and probably get the opportunity to, maybe sneak into their top 9 and play with a little bit more higher end talent as opposed to kind of grinding it out the way Minnesota's bottom 6 does. And then, of course, adding Duchesne, re-signing Dadonov was another big move for them. And what do you think of what Dallas did here in the offseason?
Yeah, I'm really, really liking everything they did. I was actually kind of expecting a Ryan Suter potential trade or buyout, too, to be quite honest. I mean, he just looked like he was slowing down in the playoffs. But all that aside, I mean, the signings they made, I mean, they got good value for guys like Sam Steele. Ty Dellandrea, they bring in on a very team-friendly deal, who I think is still developing into a really good middle 6 center, winger, wherever you want to put him in the lineup, really. He could be something special for them. But, again, I go back to the Matt Duchesne signing. I think this is just such good value. At $3 million, you essentially are getting a 50 to 60-point player. For that kind of money is just such a bargain. And, I mean, that's probably part of the reason, too. He took a 1-year deal. He expects to come in, play top 6 minutes and, rise his, bring his stock up a little bit more and then cash in after this next season. But, Duchesne's a guy who still has legs. He still can play. He still is, he's a great passer and can put up some goals. So, if they get anything close to the goal scorer they had 2 seasons ago with it was a total of 43 goals. Which I don't expect, but if they can get close to 30 goals out of this guy for $3 million, that's just a steal.
Absolutely, and and he's got the, he just has experience. He's a solid guy. He's not a go-to. We're gonna have him drive this line kind of player, but he's a very good complementary guy. He doesn't rustle too many feathers, ruffle too many feathers. So yeah, I like the signing for Dallas because of the depth that it provides them. They've kind of just gone this we don't really care. We're going for the old guys. Where at this point, this team is all in building around these young guys, and I like the way that they're doing it. Like Matt Duchesne and Dadonov and Pavelski. You've got a good mix of veterans and young guys. There were talks about Jamie Benn maybe being bought out or being traded because of the salary constraints, and it looks like they're going to run it back with all the rest of their players. So I think that they're in a really good position again to be a team that is definitely there when all is said and done. Like, this is, in my mind, a Stanley Cup contending team, especially given come trade deadline time, we know that they'll be active in shopping a first round pick and they can fill in one of their holes. We know there's no team at this stage in the game that doesn't have a glaring hole, which for them, you talked about it, Ryan Suter, you thought he might get bought out. But that may be a hole in their top 4. They can fill that hole come trade deadline.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The deadline, they can go in. And again, looking last year at the playoffs, especially when you looked at the great numbers that, Ottinger had, and then, of course, he goes in the playoffs and kind of has a few stinkers. If he can bring some mediocre goaltending, just step it up just a little bit, which I honestly think he can. He's shown in the past he's more than capable of it. So if he just brings a little bit closer to that level of hockey come playoff time and they go out and they maybe address their top 4 defense, with a trade acquisition at the deadline, I think they're going to be ripe to contend for the Stanley Cup.
Side note, if the Dallas Stars bought out Ryan Suter, right now he's at a $3.65 million cap hit. For the next 2 years, it would bring it down to $783 and then 1.4 the next 2 years. So it definitely could make sense. I think probably when you consider it, you just go, all right, we're going to save. Essentially, it's going to take us that. It'll save us $2.8 million in cap space. And when I look at that and I go, do I want to say, I mean, at any point you can save $950,000. So, I mean, at any point, just essentially for free, you could send him down to the minors, and then you're at a 2.5 cap hit for 2 years. But when I look at it, I go, is Ryan Suter through the regular season worth that 3.65? I think so. I think you also have to have guys who can get you there. And I mean, we know he can play a ridiculous amount of minutes. And when injuries happen throughout the regular season, sometimes you have to lean on those guys. And he's not a terrible player to lean on for $3.56 million in the regular season. And obviously in the playoffs, it looked like he slowed down, but not every player is going to be world beaters come playoff time. But I think he's still worth having around. We'll see, if he can kind of get back a little bit of speed. Doubt it, but just not slow down too much again. Okay, where do you want to go next? Should we talk Leafs?
Yeah, I was actually going to suggest that. I've been waiting for it.
All right, let's go to the Toronto Maple Leafs, who there have been signings, right? Like the Leafs go out and they sign Tyler Bertuzzi, they sign Max Domi, they re-sign David Kampf, and this looks like it's a team from a forward perspective that kind of padded their top six, trying to find some good fits in there. We actually thought that Max Domi made a great fit in Dallas when we had we've talked several times about Max Domi, but he leaves that situation to go home and be with the Leafs. I did see a funny quote from Max Domi. He said, "Yeah, my family all told me that thank God we can stop pretending to cheer for these other teams." And we could just cheer for the Leafs. Oh, I like that. But then of course the Leafs also sign John Klingberg to a 1-year, $4.1 million deal. Domi was a $3 million for one, and Bertuzzi is a 5.5 for one. So a bunch of 1-year deals, but I think these 1-year deals may have taken the cake from anything that Dubas had done previously, as far as potential goes.
Oh, yeah. I can just tell you right off the bat, I love what Bertuzzi and Domi are both going to bring, right? They have sandpaper, but they still have skill, which is going to be huge. And I think Bertuzzi, honestly, I envision him sliding up in Bunting's spot, what you lost in him. I think he's going to provide more offensive production, being able to play with skilled players. I know he had kind of a rough season with Detroit. And that necessarily, I don't really blame on Detroit or anybody in particular, right? I just think he was going through some injuries. You hear all these rumors all year about, is he going to be in Detroit long term? Is he going to re-sign? Or are they just going to jettison him? And that can mess with guys and their psyche. And so, now he goes into a place, in Boston during the deadline where he fits in with some skilled players. He knows that he's, playing for a contract now. And so, did he overperform a little bit in the playoffs? Maybe. But I still think you can get pretty close to a point per game out of this guy, especially with the skilled players he's going to be with, potentially with Austin Matthews on that top line with Marner. I think that could be super deadly because he's a guy that's going to go in all the dirty areas. He's going to do everything that those guys probably wouldn't do on a regular basis. And, he'll also agitate a little bit too. He's like the poor man's Matthew Tkachuk, in my opinion. So that'll be really fun to watch. And if, he can continue to bring the skill he did when he was putting up 30 goals with Larkin a couple seasons ago, I think you're going to get just such good value out of this contract. And then, of course, for him, re-signing on a bigger deal, whether it's with Toronto or someone else after the season is what it's going to be about.
Right. Yep. Betting on yourself and waiting for the cap to go up a significant amount next year. I was thinking about it. It was like, well, if the cap goes up $5 million, that's an extra $160 million in the system. And if there's that money suddenly becomes available, that's a pay raise for a guy like Bertuzzi. So I think it's smart to bet on yourself and not go signing a 5.5 for a few years. That if he has even a let's say a 65-point season, he's going to get paid in the sevens for several years if he can produce like that.
Yeah, and I think a 60, 70-point season is not out of the question for him when you get to play with guys like Matthews and Tavares.
Well, I mean, exactly. Do you think that Michael Bunting is a 60-point player every year by himself? No. I mean, he showed that he could play with talented players, and that is very unique. You know, you think about the guys through. I always go back to like a Chris Kunitz. You know, Chris Kunitz, was he great on his own? No, but could he play with good players all the time? Yes. And those players are harder to find than you think. Like, you can't, very, very few superstar players can you just put anyone with them and they're going to make them better. Like, some of them just play at such a high level that you have to have somebody who can think the same way or like do what they need done. And I think that's Zach Hyman. I think that was Michael Bunting. And we'll see if they can go for the three-peat. And I think Tyler Bertuzzi is probably the most talented goal scorer out of the three. We'll see if, I think what Sheldon Keefe is going to need to do with Bertuzzi, with Domi, and with Klingberg is get them to all play a more team defensive game. And that's three projects in one. And so I'm curious to see how Keefe does and shapes those guys' games and how they kind of fit into the rest of the system. Because, Klingberg, we know how bad Anaheim was defensively, so I think we're all willing to give him a little bit of a pass on what happened in Anaheim, but it's not as if the year before in Dallas, who's pretty decent defensively, that he was definitely lacking in the defensive prowess. Max Domi is definitely not known for playing any defense, which is probably why he's bounced around so much. Can somebody finally get through to him? That would be the question. But maybe being home, being in your spot, and being surrounded by the right guys is going to help everybody out here. And I forgot the other, probably the weirdest signing for the Leafs, definitely the weirdest signing, is Ryan Reeves, $1.35 million for 3 years to the 36-year-old.
Yeah, that's a lot of term for a 36-year-old.
It's a lot of term for a guy who doesn't do anything on the ice. 5 goals, 15 points in 61 games last year for the Wild, and another donut hole for the 12 games he was with New York, and 0 points in 6 games in the playoffs. So I totally understand. It seems as though Tree Living is just trying to bring in some different voices, and certainly Ryan Reeves is that. He's probably thinking, if this doesn't pay off, it's fine. We can send him down to the minors. That's... Well,
I think you said it right there. He's a different voice, right? They bring him in because he's a locker room guy. He's one of those guys that, I've heard everywhere he's gone, people love him in the locker room. He's a voice, somebody who's going to stand up and say what needs to be said. And when, Toronto ultimately gets in these little slumps or maybe come playoff time, right? Maybe they're just struggling, whether it's offensively or whatever, right? I would still probably put Toronto towards the top of my, Stanley Cup contenders in the East. However, again, whenever these down, these slumps occur, he's a guy that's going to step up and say what needs to be said in the locker room. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to clash with guys like Matthews and Tavares, who are leaders in that locker room as well. But again, come playoff time, I don't necessarily see him being, a guy that's going to be in the lineup permanently, but he'll be scratched most of the nights, I think, with this team. But regardless, I think he's just a guy that's worth having around at $1 million for sure.
Yep. And I think he'll probably end up playing a very similar Wayne Simmons kind of role where, hey, there may be times when they say, hey, we're going to send you down to the Marlies because we need your cap space and we'll be bringing you back up kind of thing. I think that there's definitely going to be some movement on him, at least at some point. Maybe not this year, but I would say that he's going to be a pretty flex guy. He'll be in and out of the lineup for sure. As far as the goaltending situation for the Leafs with Matt Murray, so here's what's going on right now. Ilya Samsonov, he has filed for arbitration, and what that does is it opens up a second buyout window for the Leafs following his arbitration decision, essentially to be like, well, if he gets awarded a certain amount of money, you should have the opportunity to buy someone out so that you could keep that player. That's exactly what is going to happen once they figure out what Samsonov is going to get paid in arbitration, or they sign him before that. They'll be able to buy out Matt Murray. And I believe that is what is going to happen. They'll buy out Matt Murray when they can, and that will cost them $2.6 million on the AAV for the next 2 years, rather than it costing, 4.6 this year. So they'll save themselves the cap hit goes down to $687,000 next year. So they'll save themselves, $5 million or $4 million?
Yeah, $4 million.
$4 million. This thing's weird. This the cap buyout calculator is weird because it says, here's your savings, and it says their savings is $5.33 million with a cap hit of $687,000, which is true. That is their dollar amount savings based on his contract, but that's not actually the cap savings. So it just gets a little confused. It's confusing for my little head, my little brain. Because he's getting $8 million next year.
That's the thing, yeah.
So, from a financial standpoint, it makes sense to buy him out. And from a cap standpoint, it makes sense to buy him out, too.
Yeah, and you got to remember, he's got some retained salary with Ottawa, too. So
suck it, Ottawa.
Yeah, that's going to be a weird one, though. The one thing I am worried about, I know Matt Murray's probably going to be bought out because everybody knows it's coming. I know Toronto's, obviously, they didn't buy him out during the first window because they want to try to trade him. But if you essentially just know that he's going to be let go and bought out, he's not going to get a massive contract. There's not going to be a line of teams around the block trying to get his services.
No, so he's going to be a 1-1 1 year, $1 million.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. But right now you look at it, Toronto's $8 million over the cap, and I know you can put Jake Muzzin's salary on long-term injured reserve and get some relief there, but you still got a couple million that you got to sort out. And, depending on what Samsonov gets, this will be interesting to see how they juggle that cap hit.
Yep, that's true. There is still a little bit of work to be done. I am curious as to where that money is going to come from.
Exactly.
Because when certainly you can, right now they've got 7 defensemen up. Can you move somebody to the minors? Sure, I guess you could, but there's not a whole lot of guys that you'd move out. That was there had been talks about TJ Brody being traded as well, and that would have certainly opened up the cap space. But I don't think that it's worth getting rid of Brody. I think that he's still a decent player. I think he was hampered by injuries last year. I think now is the worst time to sell on him. He's also a free agent. We know what happens in a contract year for a lot of guys. They have their best years. So I think it's worth holding on to him and kind of figuring out what to do with the rest of the pieces. And it'll be interesting to see what the Leafs do, but I think the roster you're looking at right now is probably the roster that you're going to see enter into the regular season, which when you look at their forward group, Matthews, Tavares, Marner, Nylander, we know that, but then add in Bertuzzi and Domi into the top 6, then with Kampf, Yarncroke, Lafferty, Matthew Nyes, who's actually probably going to play in the top 6, and maybe Domi slots down further. Maybe they play more of a balanced 3-line attack. I think this might be the best forward group that they're starting a season with in the Matthews era. So I think they're poised to do something. It's just a matter of, do the rest of the pieces kind of fit come playoff time again? This team's just going to be all about the playoffs. They finally won the round. Now can they extend it further? And it's almost like you got to do something quick. There's no just win a round anymore. It's going to be if you don't make it to the Stanley Cup Finals or Game 7 of the conference finals, this is people are really going to lose faith in in just about everybody here.
Well, let me ask you, elephant in the room.
They haven't already.
Right. So elephant in the room, William Nylander. I mean, assuming he doesn't re-sign this summer, do you start the season with him and play it out, or do you try to move him before the season starts?
This is the question, right? Like, this is the question for the Leafs is, like, do you hang on to Nylander and hope that you can sign him? Now, a lot of teams have done this over the years, kept high-end players without an extension. The Bruins just did it with Pasternak. Not that I'm trying to say that Nylander is as good as Pasternak, but means similar to the team. You got Pasternak. The Lightning did it with Stamkos. Let him go to the final hour. But at the same time, there's been other teams like the Calgary Flames letting Gaudreau go. The Islanders with John Tavares, they got screwed there. I'm sure a lot of Islanders fans are going, oh yeah, keep Nylander. We'll get Nylander. Like, I would think that the island would be a potential destination for Nylander. So I look at it and I go, oh, that would be. They're probably all hoping he gets to UFA and they can go scoop him and they can taunt the Leafs for the next 8 years. But I think he wants to be in Toronto. Like, I think that's pretty clear that he would like to stay. But he's also not willing to be underpaid again. Like, hey, I get it. Nylander pulls up Cap Friendly and he looks at that list of players and he goes, why am I getting $6.9 million when Tavares is getting 11? And like, am I that much worse? Am I half the player of these guys? No, I want, I would think that he wants, what we understand, he wants $10 million a season. And I think that's fine. Of course, you're not going to go in and go, I'll settle for 8.5 if that's cool with you guys. Cause then of course, they'll try to squeeze you for more. So he comes in looking for 10, maybe ultimately he's more of a 9, which if you can get 9.5 for Nylander, I'm in. Like, I think that's fair market value and that's fine. I think Tavares' deal will be up. You obviously won't be retaining him, at least not at $11 million. So that issue will kind of solve itself. Nylander has gotten better every single year. I think that he's somebody that you want to keep around if you can. You'll never replace him. So I think you do what you need to do to keep him. Maybe not at $10 million, but I think ultimately he signs, and so I think I go into the regular season saying, we want to sign him. We're just gonna play this out for a little while because everybody just needs to figure this out for themselves. So I'm okay with letting this ride for a little while because I think that without him, the Leafs are not a Stanley Cup winner. I think with him they stand a chance.
Yeah, so here's what I'll say about that. I do think when you look at what Carolina did, right, I think they're going to probably be looked at as potentially the favorite in the East, I think, coming out this year. Of course, New Jersey is going to be up there as well. I think looking at what New Jersey did, I think you can't get rid of Nylander just because of how good New Jersey's top 6 looks. Because really, I mean, if you look at both teams on paper, I'm almost tempted to take New Jersey over Toronto at this point. But again, really, it's
only from a cap management standpoint.
Well, I mean, gosh, yeah, that's
from a cap management
impressive
standpoint, yes. But from a talent standpoint, I'm still taking Matthews over Hughes. I'm still taking Marner over Bratt or Meyer, whoever you want to say. I think I'm still taking Tavares over one of those guys. It's just that
Nico Hischier? I don't know.
yeah, at 24.
But regardless, I think again, you've got very comparable teams here, and I think that's really it's going to boil down between I think one of those 3 teams ultimately. If you think this is going to go the distance, and getting rid of Nylander is not going to help you push the needle at all, right? So it's obviously a gamble, right? He could just walk at the end of free agency, but at the same time, maybe you find a way to work things out and get a deal done.
he also can submit a 10-team no trade list, right? Like that's not a big deal. There's still 22 other teams you can trade him to. My guess is that, if we hit trade deadline, like if we're in January, we get into February and it's like, and we are nowhere close. And maybe he's having a career year and the Leafs just go, we just keep him as a rental or we have to trade him and try to get something. And maybe they decide that they don't want to lose him for nothing and they trade him at that point. I think that your return is going to be similar at the deadline as it would be right now. I mean, he's $6.9 million. If the Leafs were like, hey, we'll sure, because we want to recoup assets, we're going to eat half that deal. You could trade him to almost any team at the deadline.
Yeah. No, I agree
if
with you.
If you want to move them, you can move them later.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, you have to look at the GM here in Toronto, right? Brad Treliving, obviously getting burned on Matthew Tkachuk and Gaudreau and all those other we know what happened in Calgary, right? So I don't think he's looking to get burned again by Nylander. So I do think if again there's any sort of like potential, like okay, this guy's probably not going to sign with us. Any inkling of that, I think getting closer to deadline, January, February, they're probably gonna move him, in my opinion.
Well, but it is a very different situation because Gaudreau, I think when all was said and done, Gaudreau just kind of was like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like Calgary offered him more money and he chose to go somewhere else. It had nothing to do with money. So I mean, it wasn't financial. With Nylander, this is just financial. He wants to be in Toronto. This is just, can the Leafs make his number work? And I think at $10 million, the Leafs could make it work. I think that for the 24-25 season, it would look really rough, especially if Matthews gets like $14 million a year, 13 and a half. It's going to be a tough year to go out and be able to fill in the rest of the holes. But hey, the cap goes up and maybe you're in a slightly better position in that sense. But well, that's another part of the equation too. You mentioned there with Matthews' contract, right? So I think Nylander's sitting back waiting on Matthews, saying, is he going to take a little bit of a pay cut, a discount, right? Maybe instead of that 14, maybe he comes in at 12, 8, 9, or 13-ish million, like $13 million bucks, right? Did Nick Kyprios reported that he wanted 8 years, $15 million.
Matthews did?
Yeah.
Unreal.
But they're I think that is the 8-year deal. Like I get that.
Sure. That's
your 8-year deal. But at a 5-year deal, you're looking at less. Matthews is very clearly calculated in that, like, he's like, he's kind of doing the NBA thing. Like, the cap's going to go up. I could get paid way more if I just sign a shorter deal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a trend that's starting right now. But I think, again, back to Nylander, I do think if Matthews is willing to take $13.5 million bucks at the most, then you can come back at Nylander and say, okay, cool. He took a little cut, whether it was maybe just $1 million bucks or what have you. Then you could say, okay, cool. I'm willing to come in at $9 million bucks, right? Now I'll take a little cut too to make this work. Yep.
And I think that's hopefully what everyone does here. I think gone are the times of like, yeah, man, I just want to win. I'll take far under my value. So I think Nylander ultimately resigns. That's just my gut. I think he wants to be there, and as long as they can keep this little crew together, they will. So, all right, let's move on from the Leafs. Let's maybe head in the direct. Just real quick, what do you think of the Kopitar? 2 years, $14 million. That $7 million cap hit. What do you think of that re-signing for the 35-year-old Kopitar?
Yeah, I love it.
Good with that?
Yeah, love it. Just because, again, you look at the way the league's going, and, well, I shouldn't say the way the league's going, but the way the league has been, and I think now more than ever, it's becoming more imperative you have a strong 1, 2, 3 down the middle. I mean, you look at, Vegas, what they were able to do with William Karlsson, Jack Eichel, and Chandler Stevenson, and obviously teams before them right? I mean, you have to have strong players down the middle of the lineup, and I don't think a guy like Quentin Byfield is quite there yet. He's not ready. So you bring in that insurance with Pierre-Luc Dubois, and you keep your Kopitar, your leadership, your leader around in this locker room for a couple more years, similar to what Carolina did with Jordan Staal, right? He wasn't necessarily pushing the needle offensively, but he meant so much to that team. And I think the same with Kopitar, how much he means to this team. And he can still produce offensively. So to get him at $7 million, I think just works so good for this team to be able to have such depth down the middle. And then, of course, if Quentin Byfield works out and he ends up being just a superstar center, then, you figure at that point, 2 years from now, he's ready to go and maybe be a number 1 or 2 center, and Kopitar can ride off into the sunset.
It is funny, Kopitar had his best season since 17-18, and he gets a 30% pay cut.
Right. I mean, he's made his money, right?
When the cap is going to go up, he gets a massive pay cut. Now, obviously, he has gone through some losing years, and I got to imagine that he's like, yeah, I'm done with this losing. Like, just help us to win. That $10 million contract, you look at since 16-17 where this team has been. They've only made the playoffs 4 times, and they've never been out of the first round since he signed that contract. It's pretty crazy to think about that. They have not been out of the first round his entire contract at $10 million.
Wow.
And I wonder if he looks at that and goes, hey, my contract maybe hampered this team a little bit to be able to bring in more talent. So, yeah, I'll take a pay cut. Like, I want to win. I don't want to do this anymore. And
that extra $3 million can get you a really nice third-line player to add some depth there.
Exactly. Yep. It's funny. He had 3 years in a row, 11-12, 12-13, 13-14, where they at least made it to the conference finals. They won the cup twice in there. Other than that, he's never been out of the first round. And he's only, he really has not made, he's played it for a guy with 2 Stanley Cups. He's only played in 92 playoff games.
That's shocking.
If you eliminate those 2 Stanley Cup runs, I think he's played 46 of those 92 games. So that's half of his playoff games have come in a 2-year period. The rest of the time, he can't get out of the first round. So it's just he's known as a winner, and it's funny because he just hasn't won anything since he was like 25 years old. So just an interesting, sometimes sometimes guys don't they win early and they don't win again. That does happen. I want to talk about the DeBrincat trade before we go. The move of the summer for my money, Steve Yzerman, like, kind of, I won't say undoes, but like reveals, what he had been planning the whole time. I think that this was in the works, and it makes several other moves make a lot of sense. But I want to get fresh off from your perspective, this Alex DeBrincat trade and signing. What do you think of this? How do you feel about it?
I mean, my first initial thought was highway robbery, right? Just when you put in that combination of what you gave up to bring in a 40-goal scorer and then what you were able to re-sign him at for that kind of value. I mean, look, it was pretty clear, and I think all the insiders were saying that Detroit was his only team of choice. He wanted to go home. He's a Farmington Hills kid, right? He grew up here, idolizing the Red Wings. This was the place he wanted to play, right? Similar to Max Domi in Toronto, right? That was the team he wanted to be at the whole entire time. And so other teams that we heard rumored in there, like the Ducks or the Islanders trying to go after him, right? I think that was just smoke covering up what ultimately was going to happen. And to me, the most amazing part of all this was the fact that, guy that wants to be there, you bring in a 40-goal scorer and a guy who is essentially, right in his prime at 25 years old, and you managed to keep that term to only 4 years. I mean, you just gave JT Comp for 5 years, but you bring in a 40-goal scorer and only, managed to lock him up for 4 years. Now, I don't know if, again, if DeBrincat was thinking, okay, cool, I can get out at 29.
Yeah, one more big deal. Yep.
Right? Maybe that was his motivation, but still, you get that cap hit under $8 million. I figured it was going to go right up and be a similar deal to what Dylan Larkin got. I thought that they were going to have similar cap hits. I
think just because he's a winger, that's the knock.
Maybe
the wingers are just not getting paid the way that centers are getting paid anymore.
Right. There's rare cases out there with your Panarins, your Pastas, but again, DeBrincat's not at their level of talent. But again, he's still a 40 goal scorer, and that's the one thing Detroit has missed. Right. They haven't had a guy who scored 35 plus goals since Marian Hossa in 2009.
Right. And he was there for that year.
Right. And gone. So that's the thing. They've been missing a goal scorer. Now they get a legit scoring threat they can put up with, Dylan Larkin. And we saw, he had good chemistry with Bertuzzi and managed to make him a 30 goal scorer. Now I have to imagine, Larkin with his speed, his talent that he has, and the way he plays, both ends of the ice very, very well. I have to imagine he's going to bring DeBrincat close to, at least a 75, maybe 80 point player again, and potentially bring out at least get 30 goals out of this guy. So again, for Detroit to acquire, essentially all they had to give up was a conditional first round pick. Kubalik, who's going to be a free agent after this year anyways. And
20 goal scorer, though.
Yeah, 20 goal scorer.
Not bad, insignificant in terms of what he offered from a point perspective. I'll say that the trade wasn't an all-out fleecing from an on-ice perspective this year because of, Kubalik did... DeBrincat scored 7 more goals and put up 21 more points, playing a lot more minutes than Kubalik did.
Right.
So, you're hoping for a bigger improvement from DeBrincat. Also, of course, you're hoping for someone who can play against higher end talent. Like Kubalik's 20 goals came a little bit more protected than what you think you can get from Alex DeBrincat.
Yeah, he was ripping it on the power play. That's just where he was scoring. And yeah, that's the other thing too. You look at the other pieces they gave up. Sabrango, right? He's just, he was a 3rd round pick, but a guy who, was kind of buried in that defensive system behind a lot of other prospects. Your Edvinsons, your Wallander. So, again, he was a little bit of a long shot to make Detroit here in the near future. So it doesn't hurt them so much to give up that B-level type prospect. And, the Senators get a decent guy that maybe can, end up being a top 6 defenseman for them in the future. Who knows? And then the 4th pick, of course, which to me is pretty much worthless at that point.
until it's not. But
until it's not.
But even if Ottawa goes and they draft a Hall of Fame player with their 4th round pick, it's not as if Detroit would have taken the same guy. It's a 4th round
exactly.
pick. Everything is, we'll say, in some respects, lucky because maybe each team once every 6-7 years have a successful late round pick actually join their organization and be good. Maybe even in fewer than that. I was thinking about what's the fit for Alex DeBrincat after the Wings. So last year, it seems like 2 years in a row the Wings have been the most active team at the deadline, and I remember when they signed David Perron, he left St. Louis, and a lot of people talked about how St. Louis's power play would really suffer because of the loss of Perron, just because of what he brought to the table on the power play, and how Detroit's power play would see some improvements. And I think it did. But you look at these last 2 off seasons, now adding DeBrincat, when you consider Perron and DeBrincat on there now with Larkin, and you're of course going to have Mo Seider back there probably on the kind of power play or quarterbacking this whole thing, and then you have your options to throw in Lucas Raymond. You can try even a Andrew Kopp up there playing up net front. You get JT Comfort. There's some options for the Red Wings. What DeBrincat does is open up everything for everyone else on the ice, which I think is going to only help Perron to help improve this power play too. I think Detroit could have a sneaky good top 10 power play when all is said and done at the end of the year.
Yeah, and the other thing, you mentioned Raymond's name in there too. What I really love about bringing in DeBrincat is now you don't have to force Raymond to play top line minutes, right? So maybe he got, again, he had a good rookie season, but last year he had that sophomore slump, right? So maybe he's just playing above where he really should be in the lineup. Maybe he's ultimately just a second line winger who's going to, contribute 25 to 30 goals, which would be great. 60 points, 30 and 30. And maybe that's all he's going to be, which would be fantastic. But, playing on the top line, maybe that defensive responsibility that goes along with those kind of minutes, maybe he's just not suited for that. So being able to play down in the lineup with guys like JT Compher or Andrew Kampf who can help you out defensively, that might work out ultimately better for him and for the team in general.
Yeah, and I think that, Derek Lalonde comes in, new head coach. He's only been in the league 2 years. He's had two head coaches. That's not an easy thing to deal with. He really doesn't fall off that much. He plays 8 fewer games. He had 12 fewer points. I mean, maybe he's at 10 fewer points or 9 fewer points if he plays all those games. He pretty much had the same production, like very, very similar production in terms of actual counting stats. His plus minus was much better. Almost cut it in half from minus 32 to minus 17. That has to be factored in a little bit. Like Raymond he's improving. I think that, Lalonde goes to him and says, I mean, hey, you had a good rookie season, but defensively you were not good. We can't play like that if we're going to win. You can score all the goals you want to be, but if you're on the ice 32 goals more against than you are out there for, that's going to be a problem. I know that there's a lot more advanced stats that we could look at, but I mean, when you're considering a guy who was on the ice for 32 more goals against 5-on-5, I mean, that is significant. And I know that Detroit was bad, but you do see that improvement. He actually started only 48% of his faceoffs in the offensive zone this last year. Wow. Oh, I'm sorry. Nope. He started 40% in the defensive zone, which is actually more than what he had the year before. So he went from 63 in the offensive zone to 59%. So, over the course of hundreds of faceoffs, that is significant. You're getting a little bit fewer chances, but also being leaned on more defensively and maybe playing a little bit better defensively as well. So I think all you want to see from him, actually his Corsi went up, his Fenwick went up, like all his possession stats actually went up. I think you just want to see from him a continued improvement. Like, I don't think that he got worse. I think that the team just changed and they brought in a bunch of veterans, and that probably just threw the balance of power off. And for a young guy like Raymond, who had seemingly so much success that first year, when he doesn't go and take a big offensive step, it can seem like he took a step backwards, when really I think he's just working on other aspects of his game, especially because they're probably telling him, we're not trying to win the Stanley Cup this year. We are trying to prepare ourselves to win a cup in 4 years. So learn how to play this game right. And I think Lalonde, based on what he did in Tampa Bay, he can mold these younger players, and I'm sure he's been tasked. Like, Lucas Raymond needs to be our Alex Killorn, our Andre Palat. Like, we need these guys who aren't the superstars, but are superstars on our team. And I think that if the Wings are going to go win a cup, I think that Lucas Raymond fits the bill for those types of players.
Hey, I love it. And so here's what's the funniest part of this whole entire trade to me, which I'm really hoping kind of plays out this year, but secretly I don't think it will. But, right now we've pretty much had Buffalo, Ottawa, and Detroit in the mix as teams that are up and coming. They're going to be contending for a playoff spot this next season.
Yep.
How funny would it be if this trade ends up bumping Ottawa beneath the standings, and Detroit, hops them and takes the playoff spot, and Ottawa misses? I mean, that's just the irony there. Just makes me laugh thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the difficulty about trading within the division, which is, when I look at that trade. Now, I know we said it's a fleecing. Honestly, barely Ottawa's fault. If other teams know that there's no chance he's going there, I guess I'd say that's just kind of is what it is. What do you do? But I do think that Kubalik's going to be good for Ottawa. But I wonder, is Ottawa kind of set up a little bit further ahead than Detroit to be able to win it? Like I like Ottawa's high end talent more than I like Detroit's high end talent right now. And I think the only thing they have to figure out is kind of that middle pairing defenseman kind of vibe, which I think is Detroit's issue too. So they're very similar. Although Ottawa, I think, is probably 2 years further into a deeper rebuild than Detroit. Like they've already got their, Stützle, Tkachuk, Norris, all these guys signed to their big deals already. Batherson, Giroux, and whereas Detroit is kind of still, we're waiting to see them do something, especially on the defensive side, where Ottawa goes out, they get Chychrun, they've already got Shabbat. From a defensive standpoint, you look at Detroit, other than Mo Seider, right now, I know they obviously have Edvinsson coming, who's going to be very good, but right now defensively, Detroit just does not look like they'll be able to keep up in this division just yet.
Well, we shall see.
Oh, we shall see indeed. For your sake, I hope that they do. Yeah.
Well, I will say this about the division, right? Obviously we know Toronto's going to be there at the top. But the one nice thing is obviously I think the Bruins, regardless if Bergeron comes back, I don't think both Bergeron and Krejci will be back. Maybe one of them. But I think they're not going to win 70 games again. So
no.
you're going to see a lot more distribution of those wins, going elsewhere, and Detroit hopefully can take advantage of that. I know Toronto likely will. So we'll see if, teams like, Detroit, Buffalo, Ottawa, if they can scoop up a few more wins.
There's only 8 players left on the Tampa Bay Lightning from when they won the Stanley Cup.
That's it, really?
3 years ago. Yeah. 8 players.
But I'll tell you what, though, those 8 players are super important. And,
So I think you've got Kucherov, Point, Stamkos, Cirelli, Sergachev, Hedman, Chernak, and Vasilevsky. There's your 8.
All A+ players.
It's your total core, and then the rest of them are. Was Zach Bogosian there when they won the cup? No, he wasn't. He was with the Leafs. Yeah, no. He was there. He was there when they went to the finals, but not when they won the cup.
No, so he did win with their first cup.
Oh, their first one.
Yeah, their first of the back-to-backs. He was with them and won, and then went to Toronto.
That's
and then
right.
Came back.
And then he went back. That's right.
Yeah, finals.
Yeah, okay, so I guess that's 9.
But he wasn't there for both of them. So
he wasn't there.
And count them 8.5 then.
The 1920 they won the cup. They only played 20 games. Wow.
Yeah, they skated through teams pretty. That was the bubble year, but
yes, the bubble year. Although, I guess, yeah. All right. Well, any final thoughts on signings, potential trades? Where I guess, do you want to just real quick talk guys who are left over right now? Patrick Kane. I hear Jonathan Taves is going to retire. That's the last thing I heard. I think I read something about yesterday that he's played his last game.
Teams probably don't want to take a chance on him with his injury history.
Well, I don't think he wants to play. I think that this long COVID something or other with his. I think he's having a lot of issues. I think.
Well, he had a good year, and you want to leave before the game leaves you, right? And so I think that could be the mindset here.
That too.
Let's go out on top, looking like the player I was.
Yeah, we do know that Anthony DeAngelo, he was placed on waivers to be bought out, and he will be bought out by the Philadelphia Flyers, and then he's going to go sign in Carolina. So
most likely.
we do know that's likely going to happen. I am surprised that Matt Dumba has not signed anywhere yet.
I am too, and I think maybe he's just looking for term, and maybe he's not getting that.
Well, now nobody has any more money.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, so I think now you're going to see probably a John Klingberg scenario play out here where he's going to go have to take a 1-year, deal, maybe $3 or $4 million and bet on himself and then, hope to cash in. But, again, there's no shortage of teams that could use a guy like Matt Dumba. I mean, a right-handed shot defenseman who plays very, very good. I mean, he plays very good at both ends of the ice. And you saw it. There's a reason he was wearing an A towards the end of the year with Minnesota. I mean, he's a guy that is just such a team player. He's a great locker room guy to have. So I think there's going to be a lot of teams out there that are going to be clamoring for him. Obviously not going to give him the $6 million he had, but he can still bring some good offensive production to your team and add a lot of value, especially if you have him on, say, a third pairing or, maybe a number 5-4 spot. So.
All right. And then there's also the whole Patrick Kane. Like, where's Patrick Kane going to end up here? I really have heard very little about what's going on with Patrick Kane. He still had almost 60 points. Like he was on a 60-point pace last year. He still has it. He can still do it. I know it maybe didn't end up being the great fit that everyone thought that it would be in New York. He was fine, but I don't know that it was the perfect fit. I think maybe he needs a little more speed around him. I'll tell you what I'll give you my dream scenario. I don't know if he would do it, but I would absolutely love to see Patrick Kane sign in Detroit, play with Alex DeBrincat again.
Oh.
In between it's Larkin with DeBrincat and Kane. They've got the cap space. If he's willing to sign a $5 million, maybe he just comes in. I want a 1 times 5, even a 1 times 6. I think you could squeeze it in there if he was willing to come. And he's won his cups. Maybe he says, "Hey, I'm gonna come hang out with Alex again, and we're gonna see if we can't make something of this Detroit team." And then you know what? If they don't have the season that you're hoping, you can just trade Patrick Kane at the deadline again.
Yeah, so here's what I read about Patrick Kane, and I think it was yesterday that there was an article basically came out and said that he's essentially going to wait till November, December when he's fully 100% ready to go before he makes a decision.
Okay. He's going to pull a Matt Sundin, huh?
Yeah, well, essentially what he's doing is he's chasing the cup. He's not chasing the money, or else he probably would have signed. But he knows he's going to obviously come with a little bit heftier price tag, and a lot of teams can't afford that right now. So he's going to wait till halfway through the year when teams have used up a lot of LTIR. They've created cap space that way, and then he can essentially pick and choose what teams he can afford to go to. Again, there's been talks about like Colorado, how he would fit in very well there. But again, with them being pressed up against the cap, maybe they get some relief down the road with, Landeskog being on LTIR and other players as, seasons typically, have happened to teams. So yeah, who knows? I mean, there's really no inkling on where he's going to go. It's just basically who's going to have cap space and who's contending for a Stanley Cup.
Okay. Yeah. Just going to kind of sign where whoever is doing well in November. Not a bad plan. Then of course, Vladimir Tarasenko kind of in the same boat. Definitely a little younger and healthier. I think my guess is that he has teams that he wants to go play for. My guess is that it's those teams trying to make it work. So I know I heard Ottawa was a potential destination after the DeBrincat trade. We'll see if that still holds true. But there has been some years where you're like, wow, I can't believe all these players are still available. This year has been a little bit less than that. Of course, Tatar is still out there, Dumba, Josh Bailey, but it kind of all just makes sense. I think all those guys will find ultimate landing spots, and a lot of those guys have already gotten paid throughout their career, so you don't feel as bad as the guy who you're like, oh man, he was hoping for a payday, and now he's not going to get it. He kind of gets, some of those guys get squeezed. So I wonder if Tatar just kind of does he go back to New Jersey kind of vibe, and they're just trying to fit him under the cap? That would be my guess with Tatar. I mean, he played well for them. It's not as if there wasn't a fit there. It's just a matter of him fitting under the cap, I guess.
Yeah, I think, with a guy like Tatar, he still wants to get paid. And he can still produce. I mean, he puts up 40 to 50 points.
And 20 goals.
And the plus 40 last year was it's crazy how well he played defensively. I mean, I didn't see that kind of player when he was in Detroit, but I mean, he definitely, you go to the right system, you find the right players to play with, and it works out well for you. And so, again, maybe he's just looking for the right spot, not necessarily a spot that can afford him. I don't know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. New Jersey brought in Tyler Toffoli, don't forget. So, I mean, I think that he kind of takes his spot on the top 6.
Yep.
But, we'll see what Tatar ultimately does. All right. Well, I think, we are very deep into the summer, and we have yet to do a top 10 list. So I think our next show, we'll always talk things that are going on. I think everything's really slowed down. So I think it's time to we bring our top 10s back in. You said that you had a couple ideas for a top 10. So I'm going to give you this one, and you tell the listeners what our next top 10 is going to be.
Ooh, so I got to pick one now. Okay.
You do have to pick one. Yes, I'm very much putting you on the spot.
All right, I'll tell you what. This is one that I figured at some point we'd probably do during the summer. But you know what? I think it's a good one to kick off. So let's do top 10 breakout stars next season.
Perfect. I love it. All right, next show, top 10 breakout stars. A little bit more of I suppose a little more of like a fantasy hockey show, and just in general, who is going to break out? Will Connor Bedard be on your list?
Ooh.
Is he going to break out?
We'll see.
Unexpectedly? What would an unexpected breakout season for Connor Bedard be? Like 145 points?
I think anything over a point per game, really.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll do that on our next show. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. And find it. Yeah. Wow, where'd my brain go? My brain just disappeared. You can find us on Twitter. And Justin, I hope you have a great rest of your day. To our listeners, enjoy the summer.